I think you indicated, Minister, in your response on this amendment that, you know, the promotion of culture and cultural space and infrastructure was a matter of policy rather than a matter of planning. And I would strongly disagree with you on that. I mean, again, to give a concrete example that I came upon as I was given a tour in the last week or so of the emerging Cherrywood development in our area, and I was interested in the tour. It was a fantastic tour I got of the new development, but what was interesting is that the town centre, which is really critical to the whole development being a sustainable development as it was originally envisaged, that it wouldn't repeat the mistakes of the past where you got loads of residential but you didn't get the infrastructure and the services and so on, is now in peril because the developers have decided that the town centre element is not viable for them. And so we could be the heart of what would make it a sustainable development could be in peril. And I met some residents a week or two ago who are now living up there and who very much bought into the place precisely because they saw it as a sustainable community plan, because that was the vision for it. And they are worried, because there's now a review going on, they're worried that the amenities, facilities, the cultural spaces, and so on, that they imagined would be there could now be in peril. And like, even from an environmental point of view, that's an issue, because one of the features of that development was you wouldn't have to travel to do things, right? You wouldn't have to go elsewhere for your entertainment, for your cultural activities, because it would all be there. And now they're seriously worried it may not be there. They'll have to get in their cars again in order to go to the theatre or to go to a concert. So that's a big problem to my mind, because it defeats one of the central purposes of what was, you know, imagined for this development. So I think we have to do everything. We have to go over and above, if you like, to ensure the imperative that in any development that those cultural spaces are absolutely required, that they're not an optional extra, that they have to be there, because otherwise we're not talking about sustainable communities. And the other just brief point I would make is, for a country whose reputation is built on arts and culture, it is the poor relation in terms of political priorities at almost every level. It's the poor relation. I mean, it's extraordinary. We punch so far above our weight in terms of the creative pool of talent we have in this country, for poetry, for music, for acting, for theatre, and our reputation literally on a global scale is very centrally associated with those things. But our infrastructure and our support for those things is one of the worst in Europe. One of the worst in Europe. In terms of, you know, like, if you go to Germany, for example, every little town has a theatre. Every little town. And they have full-time people employed in those things, as against sort of pop-up arts and culture that we have in this country, often dependent on whether artists can find a pub to perform in, which may be then knocked down by a developer, like the Cobblestone was threatened to be. So the idea that we would hardwire in the requirement and imperative of having cultural spaces as part of development seems to me absolutely necessary, not just reasonable, but necessary at so many levels. And I would strongly ask you to consider this amendment in that regard.
Thanks, Deputy.
Thanks. Really important contributions and important debate, and something Deputy Bryn is right. I have a huge interest in this area. Both of us have stood on stage in the past, and you know, I'm a director of a theatre company for young audiences as well. And again, it's always a struggle to find appropriate spaces to put on performances, and a huge important part of what we had been discussing when we were putting the programme for government together around town centres first, and in particular what the future uses of our urban centres are, and that this donut effect is happening where you have ribbon development, you have development on the edge of town, retail where everything is car centred, and it has hollowed out particularly many important regional towns across the country. I do, however, think that it is catered for and can be catered for in other areas, particularly in terms of arts and cultural strategies in local authorities. The development plan process, I did participate in one of the workshops up at the chocolate factory on the nighttime economy, and you know, listening in on the roundtables there, I think there's very important work ongoing in terms of the work that Minister Martin has led out on, and not just led out in terms of the policy side of it and trying to facilitate that, but also in ensuring that arts bodies and arts organisations across the country are funded to do the important work that they do. There's other elements around young people and spaces for young people in our urban centres. There's issues around public participation, lots of really good work going on, collaborative work going on, including in the town of Callan in my own county in Kilkenny. And I think important to this are our local economic community plans led by the LCDCs, works around the town centres, first policy around town teams that have been established in quite a number of towns. Sligo and Dundalk come to mind. So there's a huge amount of work going on. When you talk about buildings and spaces being available, quite an amount of them are in private ownership. Quite an amount of them we've seen the exit of banking from a lot of towns, post offices, courthouses, other buildings that could be repurposed and reused. That government has actually put in a fund, the Thrive Fund, which was announced there a number of weeks ago, and the URDF funding. So there is funding in place for towns who are creative and imaginative in the repurposing of these buildings, and could be put back into use if the custodianship issues are resolved. And also, I think, critical to the development plan process in terms of designing public spaces, critically important that our local authorities have town architects, or good urban planning makes a huge difference in terms of the reuse and the creative use, multi-use of public spaces in our urban centres. I've seen lots of really good examples across the country of some of the work that's ongoing. So I do think it's better framed in that, while I absolutely appreciate the drive behind these amendments, I'm hugely important as we try and reimagine our urban centres. In terms of the guide, I just referenced as well the Sustainable Residential Developments, the guidelines for planning authorities. In terms of mix and distributions of uses, it does state that in city and town centres, planning authorities should plan for a diverse range of uses, including retail, cultural, residential uses, and for the adaptation and reuse of existing building stock. So, you know, I think it's about the creativity of local authorities and local authority members, and the participation of the wider community in these as well. In terms of the bill itself, the obligation to prepare a strategy in terms of the creation, improvement and preservation of sustainable places and communities. The strategy shall include objectives for the provision of facilitation of provision, improvement, extension, preservation of amenities, facilities and services to meet social, community, recreation and cultural requirements. So it is there in this bill, but as I've stated, I think it's important to be mindful of the other elements of work that are already ongoing and the competencies that are in local authorities. Oh, sorry, I'm quoting from the bill itself under section 46, page 106 of the bill. The obligation to prepare a strategy in relation to creation, improvement and preservation of sustainable places and communities. It's 2A.
Okay, thank you.
It is referenced there. And again, you know, it is an area I have a huge interest in myself, and I do think it's critically important from the point of view of particularly urban centres and trying to reimagine, repurpose our town centres as they change. But I think the power lies within the development plan process. It lies within local town teams, Nighttime Economy Task Force, the works that are ongoing there, and in terms of the arts and cultural strategies that local authorities prepare themselves.
Minister.
Yeah,
please.
I mean, to put it very simply, Minister, a strategy for culture as against a requirement to provide cultural spaces in the development of an area are two related but different things. So you can have a fantastic strategy, a sort of aspirational strategy and commitment to doing things, but then not actually have the place and the spaces to do them. And it is not a requirement in the development of an area that those things are provided for, and that the space has to be made available for cultural pursuits. So I think that is the difference, and that is the actuality as well. I would suggest, Minister, that in many cases, that is the actuality, is that there literally is nowhere to do these things. Even if you have a sort of general commitment in a strategy that they should be done, it's not hardwired into the development of the area. And I think that's the logic of putting these forward. And I think the Minister should seriously consider it, because it is a terrible pity, really, when you think about Ireland of all places, that we don't put in the infrastructure to support something that is at every level that we should excel in, and where we have an extraordinary pool of talent, and where it has all those positive impacts on our society where it's done right. But in the absence of it, there are often pretty awful consequences, quite honestly. So, yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Boyd Barrett. Minister, do you wish to respond briefly? And then I can put the question on Amendment 207. It's been pressed, I presume. Deputy O'Brien, yeah.
Yeah, just, I mean, cultural strategy would be responsibility of the Department of Tourism and Culture, and there are provisions in the bill that would support such a strategy, as I outlined there in terms of Section 43 2E. Sorry. I tend to, you know, cultural facilities is specifically referenced there, so we think it's well catered for. I absolutely appreciate the points that the deputies are making in relation to it. I do think it's. I go back to the points I raised previously about other plans and strategy in terms of arts and cultural strategy. The funding that the government has put into the repurposing of buildings in town centres under the Thrive Fund, and the development plan process itself, and the outputs of the work of the Nighttime Economy Task Force, which I think are hugely important. You know, we do have quite a lot of, particularly in smaller towns, a lot of cultural facilities that are underutilised, and perhaps should be looked at in terms of multi-use for other. You know, again, that's something, and again, just to the Sustainable Residential Development Compact Settlement, the guidelines for planning authorities in terms of mixed and distribution of uses does include that towns and centres, planning authorities should plan for a diverse range of uses, including retail, cultural, and residential. So I think it's back down to the development plan process. I think critically important, but also in terms of the arts and cultural strategies, the works of LCDCs through the delivery of their local economic community plans, that unlocks the potential in local communities for the development of cultural facilities. And I do think critically important too. It's hugely important now in a very changed world to reimagine and repurpose our town centres in terms particularly of public spaces and the use of them, and taking cars out and trying to repurpose them particularly for young people, and that involves a broad stakeholder process of public participation and engagement to try and achieve that.